Welcome back to another episode of Living Your Best Damn Life, one fuck yeah, I did at a time. We're here to challenge our perspectives and beliefs of what is possible for us, shift paradigms, and help each of us know that we're not so damn alone in this wildly disconnected world. I'm Jen Vertanen, Live Your Best Damn Life coach, and I am thrilled to introduce my guest today, Angela Briones. She goes by Ange or Angela. We'll see how this shakes out. But Angela, welcome. I am so excited to have this conversation with you.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here
Yeah.
with you.
So a quick bio on Ange. Outside of her 9 or 8 to 5, I work 9 to 5. So I read the 8 to 5. I'm like, "Ugh." um, you are
Yeah.
a podcaster and writer who is obsessed with Law and Order SVU and all things Bravo. And you are also a very proud lesbian Latina. I love that. I
Yes.
didn't know, should it be Latina who's a lesbian? I just, that's what you gave me, so that's what we went with.
Yeah, I've asked the same question too.
You're like, "I don't
And
know."
I think it was Grammarly who
Oh,
told me
okay.
lesbian Latina. So I just said
Yeah.
okay.
Tell us real quick what
You
your
know.
podcast is about, and then we'll hop into kind of the meat of the conversation.
Yeah, sure. So my podcast is called The Gay Podcast for Everyone. And my hope with it is that it is for everyone, that it's for my LGBTQ plus community and our friends, our families, our allies, where we can share what it is we need from one another. We can share our each of our
Mhm.
perspectives and kind of see that not only our own journey is kind of mirroring each other when we're coming out as an LGBTQ community, or our parents are coming out as the parents of LGBTQ folks, but also that at the end of the day, our lives are very, very
Mhm.
similar. And so I thought it would be nice to have a space where each I guess each side of the community, I
Mm,
guess if so to
yeah.
speak, could have a space to just share and connect and have a conversation from there,
I
hopefully.
love that. I mean, that's what I love about podcasting so much, and the type of show that I envision this to be is having those organic conversations, and again, to help us individually feel that we are not so alone. I have my own stories of decades of just heartbreaking loneliness that no one would have guessed from the outside. And so it's very near and
Mm,
dear to my heart. And I've interviewed someone who was identified as a very large woman, and I also had a friend listening to that episode who was, I mean, you could fit her in your pocket, right? She calls me on a road
mhm.
trip crying, and I'm like, what's going on? And she's like, I had to pull over because I just listened to so and so's episode and I connected so deeply with it, right? And the
Wow.
episode wasn't a
Yeah.
weight or about weight or body or any of that, but it was just listening to our stories. We have so much more in common than we don't, and I think that's what you're saying as well.
Yeah, for sure, because I feel like definitely I'm
Mm,
50, so my parents are in their 70s, and I know growing up in the
mhm,
80s and 90s, you know, I didn't really know any other gay people,
mm,
to be honest. It was a while before I realized, "Oh, so and so who was my
uh,
friend was gay too,"
you
but we
didn't know
didn't talk
that.
about that, and we may not have even known it
Yeah.
ourselves, like, it was a long time before I figured out that I was gay. Now, for my parents, I just started putting myself in their shoes and
Mm,
kind of tried to take an empathetic view. It took me a while. That didn't happen overnight, but I started thinking, "Oh, the same way I'm in the closet and the
mm,
same way I've been trying to figure out how to tell people, they might be doing the same thing too. They might be trying to figure out, how do I tell people, quote unquote, about Angela?
yeah,
How do I share her
right.
truth? Am I supposed to share her truth?" And there were conversations that we just didn't have because we didn't know how to have
Mm,
them. I'm sure they could have just asked me, "Hey, can I tell so and so?" or "What do I do in this situation?" But it wasn't a comfortable
yeah.
space. So that's why I wanted to have the podcast, because I really wanted to, number one, celebrate parents who were demonstrating unconditional
Mhm.
love, which you think, well, that's a parent's job, right? They're supposed to
Yes,
do that. You would
and
think, right?
yes, and
But that's not always the
yeah.
case. But I really wanted to highlight the fact that, we hear so many stories of things that don't work out, or a bad story or a sad story, and I just wanted to highlight the good
Mhm.
stories, because there are good parents out there, and there are parents out there who are, you know, not so overt and not so brazen, and maybe they're afraid to wave the gay
Yeah,
flag,
yeah.
for whatever reason, maybe they're just timid, like my parents, it's not
Mhm.
their place, like, that's just not who they are in general,
Yeah.
about anything. They're very shy people or quiet people, and so I wanted to give people like that a place where they could just listen to other people going through the same thing, and maybe they might get an idea of what to do going forward, or how to start a conversation going forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and that's, again, that is the premise behind living your best damn life is let's learn from each other, right? We've all been through some shit,
Yeah,
right? We've all
yeah,
forged our path forward, right? Let's share some of those scars and wounds and like help bring others along in their journey. Before we do that though, I am a baby
sure.
pansexual. My husband knows this. This is not a surprise. But in honor of this recording, I wore my tasteful nudes shirt.
Nice.
Because I've discovered I
Nice.
really love boobs. So there you have it.
There you
With
go.
that though, you know, I am very big on giving ourselves permission, right? Especially around
Mhm.
doing the thing or the things that are so meaningful to us, things that we want to do so, so badly, right? And
Mhm.
often what gets in our way is ourselves. I mean,
For sure.
right? That's just a part of being a human.
Yes.
Um, I've done it. Yeah, I can't think of a single person in the whole who's ever existed in this whole entire world who hasn't gotten in their way at some point. And that's, it's something that kind of breaks my heart because there is so much, we're in our 50s. We have endless opportunities and possibilities and scenarios in front of us yet, but it takes courage to make those first steps, right? And then when you do the thing, it's
Yeah.
like, oh, that actually wasn't so hard. But doing the first couple of steps. So I'm curious from your own life, whether it's
Mhm.
professional, personal, both, how have you gotten out of your own way? Or where are you still in your own way? Yeah.
I think sometimes it's
Mm.
both. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Because, like, the podcast is a perfect example. I wanted to start this podcast. I started it in
Mm.
2020, June of 2020. I wanted to do it probably a year or 2 before
Okay.
that, but I didn't, and I don't even know why. Like, I remember I recorded, like, 2 episodes with
Mm-hmm.
guests, by the way, with a guest, and I never published them, and I don't even know why I didn't publish
Yeah.
them. And when I look back, I think, "Gosh, Angela, you would have put your podcast out before podcasting
Mm.
was a
Mm-hmm.
thing, if you'd done it when you really wanted to." And there would have been some good things about that and some bad things about that. Like, the good things being it was before
Right.
everybody did it, right? The bad thing being, there wasn't all like Squadcast, what we're
Mm-hmm.
talking
Mm-hmm.
on right
Or
now,
threads to
this
help
whole remote
support each other,
thing.
which is how we met.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's so much easier to find a guest right now. Like, I mean, you meet such great
Yeah.
people, right? On Instagram. I mean, everybody on Instagram is great. Um, so there are good and bad things, but like, I definitely got in my own way
Mm-hmm.
at that time, and I couldn't even tell you why. Um, I've thought about that recently because it always kind of haunts
Mm-hmm.
me, to be honest. Like, it always haunts me that I didn't do something when I really
Mm.
wanted to, because it's just wasted
Yeah.
time. And ultimately, it's all okay, everything happens in the timing that's supposed to happen, whatever, but it still does feel very much like a waste of time. But
And
and as I continue this podcast and, go from I mean, I really do celebrate every episode when I hit
Mhm. It
publish.
is
I
a big
really
deal. It is
do
a labor
because
of love.
it
Yeah.
is. There's so many steps involved. Like nobody told me how many steps are
I
involved in
know, I know. I'm
this.
gonna start
Yeah.
an SOP this weekend, a standard operating procedure doc for mine this weekend because 'cause I'm like, there are so many steps and I'm gonna
Yes.
miss an important one.
Yes. And it's like exactly what you just said. It's like nobody told me all the things that need to happen. I just thought I hit record
Yeah.
and go. And I think I spend more time like preparing or doing some sort of post-production aspect of the podcast than actually podcasting. So I think that's always really interesting. But I celebrate every
Mhm.
episode because it's usually a mental hurdle for me every time.
Mhm.
I will tell myself every single time, you know, who are you to have this
Mhm.
conversation? There's like somebody else is doing it, somebody else is doing it better, all these
Mhm.
things. And they're all just excuses. It's all just fear, and I know
Yeah.
that, but I honestly, Jen, I have to work through it every single
Yeah.
time. There has not been one episode that I haven't had to step back and work my way back through
Yeah.
it.
I was gonna say I love that. I don't love that for you, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean.
No, I
But
get it, I
I'd
get
love
it.
a deeper dive on when you say, you know, you have the inner critic coming up, the saboteur. What are you
Yeah.
actually doing each time to kind of move yourself through that? And I'm a, you know, huge believer in doing so from a place of kindness and compassion for yourself. And I
Mhm.
only it's only within the last few years that I learned how to do that for myself and to not beat myself up for it. So I'd love a little peek inside your brain and process as you're doing that.
Sure. Well, one of the biggest things that I didn't anticipate when I started podcasting was it was like these layers were I don't even wanna say they were yeah, I guess they were I was peeling back
Mhm.
layers and then not realizing that there was stuff
Okay.
underneath. Do you know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? And so, as I'm having these vulnerable conversations with people, I'm realizing that at the crux of absolutely everything is that I grew up in a space and at a time where children were really I don't wanna say seen and not
Mhm.
heard,
Oh,
but
yeah,
that's
me me too,
kind of
me
the thing,
too. My mom wasn't even trying to
that
hide that that's what
that
she said.
time. Yeah, like, a good kid
Yep,
would be, sit over in the corner and play
yep.
quietly, you play quietly and you get affirmation
Yeah.
and acceptance and everything for being quiet.
Mhm.
And when you're loud, you get reprimanded
Yep.
or there's some sort of message of shame that's involved. And so I started realizing that, oh, when I'm sitting behind this microphone and I'm speaking out loud, there's something happening over here that's telling me
Mm.
not to
Mhm.
speak, to be quiet. What if you say the wrong thing?
Ooh, that's a big
What if
one.
you,
Yeah.
yeah, what if you say the wrong thing?
For me,
Period
it's
is
what if I
the
unintentionally
biggest
harm
one.
someone? Like, I'm never going to knowingly harm
Yeah,
someone, but words
right.
matter, right? Impact is
Yes.
greater than intention. Yeah, I feel you on that.
Yeah. And I mean, my podcast, The Gay Podcast for Everyone, I step into it all the time, and I usually say, many times, I say, I will probably say
Mm,
this wrong.
mhm,
I don't know that, I'm going to be really honest that I don't know how to say this. And I want to create a
mm,
space where we can ask each other questions and say, hey, I really want to know more about this. And I'm probably going to fumble my way through it, but I need to
mhm,
because it's the only way I can get the answer. And I really want the, the cishet
mhm,
folks
mhm.
who are listening to the conversation to understand that even as a gay person, I
Mm.
also have questions or
Yeah,
I also am navigating my way through. So we can have that conversation together and we can stumble through it and that's
yeah.
okay. So I to answer your question, to go back and answer your question, what's happening in the back of my head is just
Mhm.
that of is it okay that I'm saying this out loud?
Yeah.
Is it okay that I'm talking about this topic that I was as I was growing up, I was in a closet,
Mhm.
in the closet,
Mhm.
I should say.
The big closet.
I didn't say yeah, it's like I'm saying this word that
Mm.
I wasn't supposed to say. This word that has inherent shame.
Yeah.
Is this okay? And so I work through that
Mhm.
every time, and then also, to be honest, like my age has a lot of to do with it, with what I'm saying in the back of my head. It's like, Angela, you're 50. Like, really, you're podcasting?
Oh.
Like, that's something that somebody younger should be
Oh, I
doing.
love
What are
this.
you
I love
doing?
this.
Like,
Yeah.
you're 50 years old. Like, you should be on a beach somewhere,
Yeah.
retired, whatever,
Yeah.
like something. Like, your life should look
Mhm.
different than I'm wearing a
I
Beyonce
I love
shirt,
I love that.
and you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And so it's not fitting in the box that other people have
Yeah.
set up. And sometimes that makes me question things, but then I go, "Yeah, whatever. I'm doing
Yeah.
my thing."
I gave myself I've always been somewhat bold and confident and courageous on the outside, right? This
Mhm.
year, I finally like, my insides kinda matched my outsides, and so I'm showing up and I'm feeling much bolder, much more confident, and I'm like, I'm a box disruptor." I don't know if that's, like, a technical term, but
Nice.
that's what I'm calling myself. I
Yeah.
Aging is and, like, again, I see endless possibilities and scenarios in front of me no matter my age. I collect stories of older people doing really cool shit. One
I
one of
love
my
that.
favorites is she was an 80-year-old woman who published her debut novel. It was about the 13 lives or the erotic lives of 13 older women. What? Talk about disrupting the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
So I collect these stories as
Yeah.
inspiration for myself of like, you are never too old to, you may have life circumstances, you may have health challenges, absolutely. But I always think there's kernels of what we want that we can make come true,
Mhm.
even in those. And I always think of like, what is the feeling that I want to have? And if A, B, and C
Mhm.
aren't, if I'm not able to do A, B, and C, can D give me part of that feeling? So that's just my approach to
Mm.
life.
Yeah. Well, and 2 things. 1, she's 80 years old with a debut novel,
Right?
you know?
Yeah,
Huge.
and I can't remember if
That's
she'd
huge.
written all her life and just never, moved forward with it, or if I think, because I had read her this was a couple of years ago. I think she actually started writing later in life and kinda that same thing of, like, "Who am I to do this?" Years spent thinking she was past her point where she could do that, and
Mm.
I have to go look her up
Mhm.
again, but I wonder, like, what was that thing that finally said, "I'm doing this?"
Yeah.
Mm,
I wonder
yeah,
that too, because, like, even with podcasting, I'm sure there are other people who are our
yeah,
age who want a
yeah.
podcast too, and they think, "I can't do
Yeah,
that." I don't whatever it is, I don't know what microphone to use,
I don't know
I don't have the
tech.
tech
Yep.
savvy or whatever it is. I mean, now we know that it's super easy, and of course, people will say things
Mhm.
like, "This is the easiest time to do
Yeah.
it because we can speak to each other remotely and we can do all these things," but it's still there's something
Oh,
inside of us that is either
absolutely.
gonna, like, stop us or push us forward, and I feel like for me, the
Yeah, what
second thing
pushes
I
oh,
was
yeah,
thinking
yeah,
earlier
sorry.
that kinda just drives me, especially when I think when I see my gray hair and I'm 50 years
Mhm.
old or what have you, is I think about my best friend Ruby. She
Mm.
passed away at the age of
Oh, I'm so
43. She had
sorry.
ovarian cancer. And thank you. And she was the most
Mm.
vibrant, non-filter person, and she was so proud of her
Mhm.
of not having a filter, which was great. And, you know, when I turned 50 this year, we were around the
Mhm.
same age. She would have been 51, actually. We were a year apart. And I was just like, man, we were supposed to do this together.
Mm.
We were supposed to whatever. And then I always think like every time I want to stop something and like I need to
Mhm.
feel creative somehow, whether it's writing, podcasting, whatever. She was one of my biggest
Mm.
cheerleaders for sure. And whenever I'm hesitant to say something, I just think about her. I think
Yes.
about Ruby and her of not having a filter, and, like, what would Ruby
Yeah.
do? And Ruby would say, "F
Oh
it,"
my gosh,
she'd
I
be
love
like, "Do it
Ruby.
anyway."
Ruby's time
Yes, she's the
was too
best.
soon, and
Definitely.
yeah, and I think that's the thing, people do ask me like, "Well, what if something happens to you? What if you do get a chronic illness?" And I'm like, then I then I pause and I figure it out from there, right? I can't predict what's gonna happen, so I'm done living in that space of what if, you know? And
Yeah.
as you were talking about that, it makes me think of the older women on TikTok that are just I mean, they're so
Yes.
funny. I just there's so many I want them to adopt me and be my grandma, please. They might not want me,
Yeah.
and that's okay. But I love that you shared that story of Ruby. Because that's really what it comes down to, right? Is are you gonna reach the end of your time when you don't really know what it is and be like, "Ugh, I wish I would have done that." Right? And I
Right,
love that you shared
right.
that you have this driving why, which I think is I mean, that's what it is, right? It's the motivation. It's every time you publish an episode, and is yours weekly?
No,
Monthly,
it's
okay,
monthly.
so
And what's
yeah.
funny
No,
I'm
go
so sorry
ahead.
to interrupt you. What's funny about that is I wish it was at least every
Mm,
2 weeks, but as we were talking about before we started recording, with a
yeah,
full-time
it's
job,
tough.
sometimes things are very challenging, and so for a minute, I was trying to do it more often, and then I was like, "You know what? Consistency is
Mhm.
also once a month, and if and when you can do it more, then you give yourself permission to do it more
Yeah.
then, but in the meantime, just do this, and it's hard,
Oh,
Jen, I'm not gonna lie to you
absolutely.
because I see other people, like, I see other people doing it, more
Mhm.
often. Their frequency is just off
Mm,
the charts, and then I have to remember to stay in my own
yeah.
lane, which isn't
Nope.
easy, and I'll tell you, like, the biggest thing for me is just having people in my life, my partner, and also my sister, my sibling, who, just they're my
Mhm.
cheerleaders, just like Ruby was, like, I can go to them and I can complain, and they will let me complain, and then they'll let me find my way
Yeah,
back onto the track.
absolutely.
And I think everybody needs that. But I think I have to give myself permission to completely
Mhm.
derail, and I
Mhm.
do, and I will, and then I have to give myself permission to
Yep.
slowly get back on the track,
Yeah, and like we
and it happens over and over and
yeah.
over.
I just earlier, end of last week, I had another mini existential crisis, and this is an old pattern of mine. This time I wasn't questioning my business, the umbrella of my business, the podcast. Like I wasn't questioning any of that, but I'm like, I don't think
Mhm,
my main offering is it yet, right? Past me would have spent, I don't know, weeks, sometimes years if I'm being honest. But this version of me who's done a lot of work, internal work, it was a day or 2, but I'm like, I'm not gonna force myself through it, right? Again, bringing that
mhm.
grace and kindness to it and patience, which is hard for me. I'm not a patient person. And I wanna double tap, to use a word from my corporate day job. I wanna double tap on what you said that it's hard, right? We're not gonna sugarcoat it.
Mhm.
We're not gonna like positive toxic BS over it. It can be hard as hell. But what I also heard you saying, and this is what I want folks to take away, is that if you have a strong enough why, if you have that strong enough motivator behind it, that's what makes it worth it, right? That's what makes going through the hard because you know that ultimately it's serving what you want to do, what fills you up as a person. Um, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, yeah. Because there's so many times, I'm not gonna lie, I have thought, "Oh, it's so much easier to
Yeah,
quit,
yeah,
just not to do it.
absolutely.
It's so much easier." And yes, it would be easier, but it also feels like
Mm,
kryptonite. Like it feels like it's killing
mhm,
me not to
yeah,
do it. And so that's where I went to the monthly podcast thing, because I was just like, if I can show
Mhm.
up consistently every month and know it's not the frequency that I really
Mhm.
want, but if I can just do
Yeah.
that and show myself and continue to have that example for
Mhm.
myself, maybe on its own, the
Yeah.
frequency will increase.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, I mean, I got to tell you, you know, for me, I don't know how people do it with kids. I
Yeah.
don't have kids, I don't
I'm
know
an empty
how.
nester. I feel you.
I'm like, I'm barely doing this with the full-time
Yeah.
job. I've got my dog and
Your
I've got,
partner.
my
Yeah.
partner, and we stay busy on the weekends and stuff. And of course, my parents are in Austin and my sister
Mhm.
and brother-in-law in San Antonio. And so like we stay busy, and sometimes it feels like even getting on
Mhm.
this podcast, I
Yeah.
was talking to my mom prior and she was like, "What are
I'm
you
like,
doing
"Oh,
tonight?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna join a friend for a podcast." And I feel when I say that, I feel like I'm a teenage kid telling my mom, like, "I'm gonna go do this thing with my friend," you know? And it
we're
feels
gonna
very much
talk
like
on the
that,
phone like it's
Yeah. Yeah.
1982."
And I know she's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
doing this, but I feel like, she's probably thinking,
Oh,
"Okay,
interesting.
that's cute for you." But I know that's
Yeah.
not it, but that's the feeling, and I'm like, I kinda like that this podcasting
Mhm.
life does feel a little bit playful. Do you know what I
Absolutely.
mean?
It's a creative outlet, and like
Like
we said, it's a labor
yeah,
of love.
very
What
much
I
so.
think the nugget there, is, it's not the cadence that you have right now isn't the ideal for you, but you have found what works for right now, right? While
Mhm.
holding the vision of maybe someday something will change and I'll be able to do it more. But that you didn't let that stop
Right.
you. And that is the message, right? You didn't let that stop you. So I'm wondering, what advice do you have for someone listening in, whether they want to start a podcast or do something else? Um, and especially if it's something that they're like, "I'm gonna run into that inner critic, like, on a monthly, a daily, a weekly basis." Like, what advice do you have to them to get started or to take the next step?
Yeah, it's so hard because, people always say just
Yeah.
start. That is true.
Duh.
That
You
is
know?
true because I do I do very much regret that I didn't start when I really
Mhm.
wanted to, right? But I think one of the things that has been really kind of a saving grace for me has been
Mm.
journaling. And I've always journaled to some degree, like in the morning, like in the writer
Mhm.
world and creative world.
Yeah,
There's Julia Cameron's
yep.
Artist Way. I've been doing the morning
Yeah,
pages
I'll
for
link that in the
years,
show notes
right?
for folks.
Nice, yeah, and, I've been doing the morning pages for years, but it wasn't until recently that I kinda started doing them a little bit
Hmm.
different. Before I was doing it as Julia Cameron says in
Yeah.
the book, kind of like a stream
Yeah.
of consciousness writing,
For 10
right?
minutes? Is that how long she does?
I do
Oh,
3
3
pages,
pages,
so
yep.
however long that takes. For me, it takes about
Okay.
40 minutes, to be honest. But I did start changing it once I started in the last couple of years, really once I started the podcast more, well, once I started to podcast a little
Mm,
different, I should
mhm.
say, like with a little more intention of just really focusing on like what is stopping me. I think that's when the layers started to peel back, and that's when
Yeah,
things started
yeah.
feeling like, I was like shaking something of like, what's happening? So I started doing those morning pages with more
Mm,
intention. And instead of a stream of consciousness, I was really asking myself
I love
questions,
that.
like, what is it that when you want to quit, what is
Mm,
that thing? What's happening
mhm,
there? And what's that fear? And what's that about? And I really just kind of kept writing with like trying to dig and
mhm.
dig and dig and dig. And I feel like it really has helped me because yeah, you should just start the thing you wanna do and take action
Yeah,
and put one foot
easier
in front of
said
the
than
other
done.
and, the path will lay itself out. Exactly. But more so, like, at the end of the day, it's literally just you doing
Yeah,
the thing. Nobody else can do it for you. And as I'm saying these words, I'm telling myself the
absolutely,
words back, right?
absolutely.
And yeah, and it's like, I feel like journaling and asking myself those questions has kinda helped me every
Mhm.
day go back to revisit, and I could have a week of, you know, of I haven't done anything, I'm standing still, why am I
Mm.
standing
Mhm.
still? But at least I feel like I have myself to go back
Mhm.
to, if
Yep,
that makes sense?
absolutely.
And I feel like that has been very helpful. It's, like, been a home base for
Mhm.
me to kind of be as honest as I can be about the
Mhm.
things that are stopping me and why I'm
Yeah, getting
stopping
to the
myself, and then
root
I
of
start to
it so you
explore
can
it.
understand it. Because once
Yeah,
you understand and you're aware, it's like, "Oh, now I have something tangible I can actually start
right,
working on." Yeah.
right. And then because I have to answer that inner
Mhm.
critic when she pops
Absolutely.
up, and then I have to come back and say, "Okay, I recognize what's happening here." You
Been here
know?
before.
Been here many times. Yeah.
There's a well-worn
So here's what we're
path.
gonna
You're so
do.
cute doing this to me
And
again.
exactly. So it's like I have to work through it on my own, and as
Yeah.
much as I wanna, you know, talk my partner to death
Yeah,
about all the things about
right.
me, like, "Don't you wanna hear about me all the time?"
Help
And
me,
even to
help
my sister.
myself.
Yeah. Like, I at the end of the day, I do have to help
Mhm.
myself. So I feel like that has been really, really
Mm.
helpful. Just, like, more intentional morning
Yeah, I
pages.
love that, and, I
Yeah.
don't know your experience with that, but I found that, I don't love the concept of forming habits, but that this is what it's gonna sound like. It's like, the more you do it and yes, you have to really intentionally think about it to begin with, but one
Mhm.
day you wake up and you're like, "Oh, it's just kind of second nature to think this way." And you're like, "When did that happen?"
Mhm.
You're like, "I don't know, but I like it,"
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned building habits, and it made me immediately think, like, what's when you asked what's something you
Mhm.
can do to, like, make the thing happen, building the
Mm.
space.
Mhm.
Like, if you just start to build the space, like, if you wanna write, and start to build that what does your ideal writing space look
Mhm.
like, and just kinda start doing
Yeah.
that, or what does your ideal podcast space look like, and just do it
Yeah,
little by little. It kinda calls you there,
absolutely.
So I think that's part of it too.
Well, this has been wonderful. And as we wrap up,
Thanks.
a favorite question of mine, and it is not a favorite of others all the time. If we really knew you and if we really knew your journey, what would we know? It can be funny, poignant,
Mm,
full of wisdom, like playful. Sky's the limit here.
yeah. I think people are always surprised that, like, I'm a little more
Ooh,
spicy, like, I'm a spicy
yeah, yeah.
Latina,
I love it.
and I think a lot of people are like, "Oh, you're so
You're
nice,"
like,
whatever, and I mean, I am, I'm nice. I'm nice. I'm like, but, I I will say what I need to
oh,
say too,
I love that.
and that always throws people off 'cause I'll always get like, "I didn't know you were
Yeah,
like that," and I'm like what?" Like,
yeah.
there's no problem, but, a little more
I love
spicy than
it.
people
I love
realize,
spicy.
so, yeah.
All right, well, we will have all your information in the snow the snow notes. We will have all your information in
I
the
love
show
snow
I'm gonna
notes.
leave that in, snow notes.
Yeah, you
I
should.
am. We'll have all your information in the show notes, including links to The Artist's Way and I don't even know how old she is now, but when she published her novel at 80, because it is just a phenomenal story. And I can't thank you enough for being on here
Yeah.
and sharing the bits and pieces with us, and especially those very tactical, tangible, practical strategies you gave folks. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Jen. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
This was really fun. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. It was
You
great to
too.
meet you too.
Bye.